A Greek warrior spends 20 years trying to get home, 10 years fighting a war that wasn't his, another 10 years lost at sea facing monsters, gods, and his own worst impulses. Everyone he started with dies. His kingdom crumbles. His wife is besieged by parasites trying to steal his throne. Yet Odysseus survives and reclaims everything. Homer's Odyssey, written around 700 BC, became one of the foundational texts that shaped Stoic philosophy. When Zeno of Citium founded Stoicism in Athens around 300 BC, he drew heavily from Homer's epics. Marcus Aurelius quoted Homer throughout his meditations. Epictetus used Odysseus as the model of the Stoic sage in his lectures. Seneca referenced the Odyssey when teaching students about resilience. Why? Because buried in this ancient adventure story are 12 profound lessons about human nature, suffering, and survival that work as well today as they did 3,000 years ago. Today you're discovering how a Bronze Age poem about a lost sailor contains the blueprint for handling everything modern life throws at you. Subscribe to Stoic Forge if you want ancient wisdom that actually applies to your life. Now let's explore the Stoic lessons hidden in the Odyssey. Lesson 1. Your suffering has a purpose, even when you can't see it. The Odyssey opens with Odysseus trapped on Calypso's island for 7 years. She's a goddess who offers him immortality, eternal youth, and unlimited pleasure. He refused. Every day he sits on the beach weeping, staring at the horizon, desperate to go home to his aging wife and uncertain kingdom. From the outside this looks insane. He's choosing certain suffering over guaranteed paradise. But Odysseus understands something crucial. Meaning matters more than comfort. Going home is his purpose. Without purpose, even paradise becomes a prison. Epictetus used this story constantly in his teachings at Nicopolis. He would tell students, Odysseus could have lived forever as a god's consort. He chose 20 years of suffering instead because suffering with purpose is superior to pleasure without it. When Epictetus was enslaved under Epaphroditus around 68 AD, he could have despaired that his suffering was meaningless. Instead, he chose to see it as preparation. The slavery that crippled his leg also freed his mind by forcing him to find purpose beyond comfort and control beyond circumstances. Marcus Aurelius faced this during the Marcomannic Wars from 6 stuck in military camps on Rome's freezing northern frontier, watching soldiers die from wounds and plague. He could have questioned why fate placed him there. Instead, he wrote, "Everything that happens, happens as it should. You will find this true if you watch closely." He chose to see purpose in the hardship. Here's your application. You're stuck in a job you hate, a relationship that's difficult, or circumstances that feel like punishment. The Stoic question isn't why is this happening to me? It's what is this preparing me for? Odysseus' years of suffering taught him patience, humility, strategy, and self-control. He needed every lesson to reclaim his kingdom. Your current suffering is teaching you something you'll need later. The purpose may not be visible yet. Trust that it exists. Lesson 2. The greatest danger is forgetting who you are. On the island of the Lotus Eaters, Odysseus's men eat a flower that makes them forget their homes, their families, and their mission. They want to stay forever in blissful forgetfulness. Odysseus has to physically drag them back to the ships, tie them down, and force them to continue the journey. This is one of the most psychologically sophisticated moments in ancient literature. Homer understood that the greatest threat isn't always external danger. Sometimes it's the temptation to forget your values and mission, when forgetting would be easier than remembering. Seneca wrote about this in his letters around 63 AD. We are not born for pleasure. We are born for higher things. He watched wealthy Romans in Nero's court lose themselves in luxury and entertainment, forgetting who they were supposed to be. Like the Lotus Eaters, they chose comfortable amnesia over difficult purpose. Marcus Aurelius battled this constantly as emperor. The temptation to abuse absolute power, to indulge every whim, to forget his philosophical principles when they became inconvenient. In his meditations, he repeatedly reminded himself, remember who you are, remember what you stand for, remember your principles. These weren't abstract musing. They were desperate attempts to avoid the Lotus Eaters' fate. Epictetus saw this in his wealthy students, who came to study philosophy, but couldn't give up their comfortable delusions. He told them, you cannot learn what you think you already know. You cannot remember what you've chosen to forget. The students who succeeded were the ones who refused to eat the lotus, who kept their identity and mission clear even when forgetting would have been more comfortable. In modern life, the lotus takes many forms. Endless streaming content that helps you forget your goal. Social media that replaces your actual identity with a performed one. Alcohol or drugs that numb you to who you're supposed to be. Career paths chosen for money that make you forget what you actually value. Ask yourself, what lotuses am I eating? What am I deliberately forgetting because remembering is uncomfortable? What parts of my identity have I lost because maintaining them required too much effort? Odysseus survived because he refused every temptation to forget. He turned down immortality, unlimited pleasure, and comfortable amnesia. He remembered who he was and where he was going even when remembering meant choosing pain. That's the Stoic path. Lesson 3. Conning and patience defeat. Brute force. Trapped in the Cyclops Polyphemus's cave, facing certain death, Odysseus doesn't try to fight the monster directly. He gets him drunk. He tells him his name is nobody. He blinds him with a sharpened stake. When the Cyclops screams for help, the other Cyclopes ask who's attacking him. He yells, "Nobody." They leave him alone. This story became central to Stoic teaching about practical wisdom. You can't always overpower your problems, but you can often outsmart them. Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you but how you use what happens that matters. He wasn't speaking theoretically. As a slave, he couldn't fight Epictetus directly. He survived through cunning and patience. He learned what pleased his master. He studied when he could. He waited for opportunities. When freedom eventually came around 93 AD, he was prepared to use it because he'd been strategic rather than reactive. Marcus Aurelius faced this with the Senate. He had absolute power and could have ruled by force. Instead, he used patience and political skill. When senators opposed him, he didn't crush them. He persuaded them. When conspiracies formed, he investigated quietly. When Avidius Cassius rebelled in 1705 AD, Marcus could have unleashed brutal retaliation. Instead, he moved strategically, and when Cassius was killed by his own men, Marcus pardoned everyone involved. Seneca learned this serving Nero from 54. He couldn't control Nero's increasingly unstable behavior directly. He used subtle influence, strategic timing, and careful persuasion. When he saw he was losing influence, he didn't fight desperately to hold on. He strategically withdrew, asked to retire, and survived years longer than he would have by fighting directly. The lesson isn't about deception. It's about matching your response to reality, rather than to your ego. Odysseus wanted to scream his real name at the Cyclops. He wanted the glory of fighting directly, but winning mattered more than ego. So he chose cunning. You're facing a difficult boss. Confronting them directly might feel righteous, but accomplish nothing. Strategic patience and careful positioning might actually solve the problem. You're in a failing relationship. Dramatic confrontations might feel cathartic, but destroy everything. Thoughtful conversations and strategic choices might save it or end it cleanly. Stoicism isn't about being passive, it's about being strategic. Sometimes the strongest response is patience. Sometimes the wisest action is cunning. Sometimes winning means looking weak until the perfect moment to act. Lesson 4. Grief and loss. Don't excuse giving up. Odysseus loses every single one of his men during the journey home. He watches them die in battles, eaten by monsters, drowned in storms, killed by their own foolishness. By the time he reaches Ithaca, he's alone. Everyone who started the journey with him is dead, yet he continues. He doesn't quit, doesn't give up, doesn't say what's the point if everyone's gone. He pushes forward because his purpose exists, independent of who's still with him. This lesson devastated and strengthened the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children to disease. His daughter Lucilla betrayed him in a conspiracy. His wife Faustina died in His co-emperor Lucius Verus died in 1609 AD. His most trusted advisor, his old tutor Fronto, died. By the end of his reign, almost everyone he'd started with was gone. In his meditations, written during these losses, Marcus quoted the Odyssey multiple times. He reminded himself that Odysseus's grief didn't excuse quitting. He wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." Not because loss doesn't hurt, but because using loss as an excuse to abandon purpose makes the loss meaningless. Seneca's older brother Gallio died. His nephew Lucan the poet was forced to commit suicide by Nero in 65 AD. Seneca himself would die the same year. Before his death, he wrote, "Life is a process of losing those we love. The only question is whether we let that loss destroy our purpose or deepen it." Epictetus taught students who'd lost parents, siblings, fortunes, and freedom. He told them the story of Odysseus losing his entire crew, but still swimming to shore. He said, "Your grief is valid. Your loss is real. Now what? Will you sink or swim?" Odysseus. Modern life brings guaranteed losses. Friends die or drift away. Relationships end. Health fails. Careers collapse. Parents age and pass. Every long life is a story of accumulated loss. The question the Odyssey asks is, will you let loss stop you? Or will you, like Odysseus, keep swimming toward home? Grief doesn't excuse abandoning your purpose. Loss doesn't justify giving up on meaning. Odysseus arrived home alone, scarred, exhausted. But he arrived. That's what mattered. That's what the Stoics taught. Keep going even when everyone else has stopped. Disguised by Athena, stripped of all symbols of his former power, he enters his own palace unrecognized. The suitors mock him. His own servants disrespect him. Even his dog, ancient and dying, is the first to recognize. This moment teaches a profound Stoic lesson. Your past accomplishments mean nothing in your present circumstances. You must prove yourself again, starting from zero. Epictetus embodied this completely. Whatever family or status he had before slavery meant nothing. When he gained freedom around 93 AD at approximately age 40, he had to build his reputation from scratch. No one cared that he'd studied under Musonius Rufus. He had to prove his wisdom through his teaching and character. When Emperor Domitian exiled all philosophers in 93 AD, Epictetus lost everything again. The school he'd built in Rome, the students he'd gathered, the reputation he'd established, all gone. At 60 years old, disabled and exiled, he started over in Nicopolis. He didn't complain about what he'd lost. He built again. Marcus Aurelius watched his predecessor Antoninus Pius die in 61 AD, and suddenly found himself ruling an empire he wasn't fully prepared for. His past as a philosopher prince didn't matter. The immediate crises didn't care about his education or good intentions. He had to prove himself emperor through his actions, starting immediately. Seneca experienced this cycle multiple times. Exiled to Corsica in 41 AD, his reputation in Rome meant nothing. When recalled in 49 AD, he rebuilt his position through service to Agrippina and teaching Nero. When he fell from favor in 62 AD, his decades of service didn't protect him. Each time, he started again from wherever he was. Here's your modern application. You lost your job. Your past success at that company means nothing to the next employer. You got divorced. Your years together don't matter to your new beginning. You failed publicly. Your previous reputation is gone. You're injured or ill. Your former physical abilities are irrelevant to your current situation. The Odyssey teaches that this stripping away isn't the end. It's the test. Odysseus, reduced to a beggar in his own palace, still possessed everything that mattered. His cunning, his patience, his courage, his purpose. The external trappings were gone, but the essential man remained. When everything external is removed, what's left? That's who you really are. That's what you build from. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, was still Odysseus. You, stripped of your former status, are still you. Now prove it. Lesson 6. The ultimate victory is self-mastery. The climax of the Odyssey isn't the battle with the suitors. It's earlier, when Odysseus, still disguised, watches the suitors abuse his wife, destroy his property, and mock his memory. He has to restrain himself from attacking too early. Homer writes that Odysseus struck his chest and spoke to his heart. "Endure, my heart. You have endured worse than this." This moment of self-control, not the later violence, is the true victory. The Stoics recognize this as the highest achievement, mastery of your own impulses in the face of provocation. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around this moment. He told students, freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is wanting only what you can control. Odysseus wanted to attack immediately. He controlled that want. That control was his freedom, even while disguised as a powerless beggar. Marcus Aurelius quoted this exact passage from the Odyssey in his meditation. Facing conspiracies, incompetence, and betrayal, he reminded himself, "Endure, my heart. You have endured worse than this." The temptation to unleash his imperial power against everyone who frustrated him must have been constant.
His restraint was his greatness. When Avidius Cassius rebelled, Marcus could have made an example through brutal punishment. Instead, he showed restraint. When Faustina faced accusations of infidelity, he could have indulged in jealous rage. Instead, he maintained dignity. The self-mastery in these moments defined him more than any military victory. Seneca wrote extensively about exactly this theme. In On Anger, he argued, "The greatest victory is the one that requires no battle." He meant that mastering your own reactions eliminates the need for external conflict. When Nero turned against him, Seneca could have fought to maintain power. Instead, he restrained that impulse and withdrew, buying himself several more years of life. The modern world constantly tests this lesson. Someone insults you online. Every impulse screams to respond, to defend, to attack. The Stoic response is Odysseus striking his chest. "Endure, my heart." Your co-worker takes credit for your work. You want to expose them immediately. "Endure, my heart." You have endured worse. Your teenager is deliberately provocative. You want to escalate. "Endure, my heart." Self-mastery isn't weakness. Odysseus eventually killed all the suitors, but he waited until the strategic moment, when he'd positioned himself perfectly, when he had his son and loyal servants ready, when the odds were in his favor. His patience made victory certain. His impulse would have made it impossible. The victory isn't never feeling the impulse to react. It's feeling the impulse and choosing not to follow it. That moment of choice, repeated thousands of times, builds the self-mastery that makes everything else possible. But before he can reclaim his palace, he must remember who he was before war and Wandan changed him. The homecoming isn't just geographic, it's psychological and moral. When Penelope tests him by asking about moving their marriage bed, Odysseus proves his identity not through appearance, but through knowledge. Only the real Odysseus would have. The bed was built around a living olive tree, immovable. He built it himself. Only someone who was truly home in that identity would know. Epictetus taught this constantly. No exile can take away a person's true home, because true home is internal. When he was exiled from Rome, he didn't lose his home. His home was his philosophical practice, his principles, his character. These moved with him to Nicopolis. The geographic location changed, but he remained at home in himself. Marcus Aurelius spent most of his reign away from Rome, fighting wars on the frontiers. In his meditations, written in military camps, he never complained about being away from his palace. He wrote, "Nowhere can a person find a more peaceful refuge than in their own soul." His home wasn't a building in Rome, it was his Stoic practice, which he carried everywhere. Seneca experienced actual exile to Corsica for 8 years. In his Consolation to Helvia, written to his mother during exile, he argued, "Every place is my native land, for all things belong to the wise man." He taught that home is a state of being aligned with your values, not a geographic location. This lesson transforms how you think about belonging. You feel lost in your career, like you don't fit. The Odyssey teaches that you haven't found your way back to yourself, to the work that's truly yours. You feel disconnected in your relationships, like you don't belong. You've lost touch with your authentic self, trying to be what others expect. Odysseus could have returned to Ithaca and performed kingship without truly being the king. The suitors were doing exactly that, pretending to belong. But Penelope's test forced him to prove he was actually home in his identity, not just his location. Ask yourself, am I home in myself? Do my daily actions reflect who I actually am? Or am I performing someone else's version of my life? Odysseus built his marriage bed around a living tree that couldn't be moved. What's the immovable core of your identity that proves you're truly home? Geographic location, job title, relationship status, these are all external and changeable. The Stoic home is internal and portable. Build it well enough that no exile can take it from you. Lesson 8. Wisdom means knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Throughout the Odyssey, Odysseus survives impossible situations by knowing when to reveal himself and when to stay silent. He tells Polyphemus his name is nobody. He lets Penelope believe he's a beggar for days. He reveals himself to his son, but not to his wife immediately. Each calculated disclosure happens at the strategic moment. Seneca wrote about this in his letters. Speech is silver, silence is golden, but knowing which is wisdom. He served in Nero's court, where one wrong word meant death. He survived by understanding when to speak truth, when to offer gentle suggestions, and when to remain absolutely silent. Marcus Aurelius practiced this with the Senate. He could have used imperial power to force every decision, speaking with final authority on every topic. Instead, he listened far more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words carried weight, because they were rare and measured. He wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like that," meaning not to match the foolishness of constant unnecessary speech. Epictetus taught students that most of what we say is unnecessary, and often harmful. He said, "If you wish to improve, be content to appear foolish on unimportant matters." Odysseus appeared foolish, weak, and insignificant to the suitors, because strategic silence served his purpose better than proud speech. The lesson cuts against modern culture, that values constant communication. Social media rewards those who share everything. Workplace culture often mistakes constant talking for contribution. Personal relationships can feel like they require constant verbal processing. But watch what happens to Odysseus when he speaks unnecessarily. After escaping the Cyclops, he can't resist shouting his real name in pride. Polyphemus asks Poseidon to curse him, leading to years more wandering. That one moment of pride, of unnecessary speech, costs him dearly. Consider your last argument that went nowhere. You felt compelled to have the last word, to make your point completely understood, to defend your position.
How did that work out? Usually, more speech makes things worse. Odysseus learned to wait. Practice this today. In your next meeting, speak half as much as you normally would. On social media, scroll past the thing that outrages you without comment. With your family, when you feel the urge to defend yourself, pause for 5 seconds and consider whether responding improves anything. The Stoic lesson isn't to never speak, it's to make speech strategic. Odysseus eventually revealed everything, but at the perfect moment.